So here we go then. So this is John's collection, which we sold at auction in November 2019. So here's the man. It's John Vincent with one of his smaller cameras. Probably quite well known to people in the club, and say quite well known to me through the various meetings that we had at camera fairs. Very knowledgeable guy, very knowledgeable, very self-deprecating, didn't boast about anything. Say all the time that I knew him, I didn't have any idea that he had this in-depth knowledge of Reid and Taylor Hobson. The Taylor Hobson story is probably, which he had an awful lot of research on, was probably almost as extensive as his Reid stuff. I knew he lived in Leicester, which was obviously literally just across the road from the Taylor Hobson and the Reid factories. I had no idea what he'd got, not until I saw the stuff. And I think maybe what swung it for me getting the job to sell the things is not only did I know John, but I think the family could see my hardly unbridled enthusiasm when one amazing piece of the Reid history came out of the box, followed by another one. It was just amazing. So I think maybe some of my enthusiasm was instrumental in me handling the sale. So this is one of the first things that I was shown. So this is John's extensive, well, part of his extensive research notes and his archive. Those of us that remember cassette tapes will notice up the top right-hand corner of the screen there is a whole selection of recorded interviews that John did with people who actually worked in the Reid and Siegrist factory. Apparently, he would occasionally put an advert into his local paper, which was the Leicestershire Courier, I think it was, and ask for anybody had any information or anybody used to work at the factory would be willing to be interviewed. So there's hours and hours and hours worth of recorded interviews here, which John had transcribed a lot of. One of the problems that we had is, this is, as you can see from the loose leaf folders down the bottom, John was absolutely meticulous in recording everything. His writing was absolutely tiny. It was really difficult to read. We did at one stage go back to those original cassette tapes to try and get them transferred into a digital format, so then we could transcribe them literally word for word. The problem is that I don't know how many times they've been played. I've got, as it happens, I've got one of those clever machines where you can make a digital recording of a record or a CD or not a record or a cassette tape. Unfortunately, halfway through the second one, the tape jammed in the machine, because obviously these are very old cassettes and they've been played and stretched a number of times. So that's pretty much, and I know I said this at the AGM 6 months ago, that it's pretty much still a work in progress. We're still wanting to digitize all those recordings, but not wanting to damage them so that we can't get to them. So as you can see, there's a big old selection of photographs, a couple of auction catalogues, the cassette press cuttings, just hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff. So there's a bit of a close-up of some of his tiny writing. I did get Sally, my faithful partner and assistant, to try and start to transcribe some of these, but obviously she was struggling with some of the relatively technical terms that we came across, and also it seems to be that John was also making notes of pretty much every phone call that he made to do with people who'd worked at Reid or people who had got a Reid or anything else that he thought was interesting. So those notes made sort of on the fly are a bit more difficult to read otherwise, as opposed to the ones that he's transcribed. If you can see there on the left-hand side in the middle, you'll see an X4. That's quite an interesting thing, which we'll come to later on. So just a little bit of background about Reid and Siegrist. I expect most of you know the story. They were originally instrument makers, high quality aircraft instruments, and that was their factory was originally was down in Surrey and then moved to Braunston in Leicestershire. And just prior to the war, they were making that. Obviously, got a huge amount of work during the war, but then when the war ended, and obviously all their WD contracts ended, they were looking to diversify into something else. They were very skilled engineers, and the boss, Major Reid, was looking to diversify, and they decided that one of the things that they would try would be to make a high quality British camera, because after the war, all the Leica paperwork and patents had been appropriated by the Allies and had access to it. Again, we'll come into that later. So by 1947, camera production, which is in inverted commas because it was pretty much handmade rather than a production line, especially at the beginning, ran alongside their regular work, which was still some of these high quality instruments. Okay, so here's what we know about Reid cameras. So this is all sort of perceived knowledge, I guess. Okay, Major George Reid and Frederick Siegrist set up the company in 1927. It's believed that Sir Stafford Cripps asked Reid he was instrumental in asking them to produce a British Leica. It's thought that the British Army sent a delegation to the lights factory to bring back detailed plans so that Reid and Siegrist could make their copy of the camera. Several finished Leicas came back as well as those plans, is what perceived wisdom will have us to believe. That the Reid is an exact copy of the Leica 3B. And that the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester were presented with a Reid camera at the British Industries Fair in 1947. That Reid military cameras came in a different box to their civilian cameras. And when camera production finally ceased, everything was sold off for scrap. So guess what? Pretty much none of that is true, as we'll see. So this is what we do know about Reid cameras. Yes, Reid and Fred Siegrist ran the company, but Reid was never actually a major. In fact, George Reid was never even in the army. He was a flight lieutenant in the Royal Navy Air Service, which in the First World War, and then in the Second World War, he was prior to the Second War, he was in the RAF. So not only was he never in the army, but as I have since has been pointed out to me, that I just assumed that major was the army equivalent of flight lieutenant, which was a bit of a mouthful, so he just called himself major. Well, it isn't. The nearest rank to flight lieutenant, as I understand it, is captain. So theoretically, he should have been called Captain Reid. Can't find any evidence that Stafford Cripps asked Reid to produce a British Leica. He was Minister for the Army at the stage. We'll come to him in a minute, but can't find any written evidence. It just seems to be purely anecdotal. Okay, so several of the ex-employees say that the staff that went to the lights factory were not, in fact, they may have been accompanied by some army personnel, but they were several ex-employees from the factory, which were sent to the factory in borrowed officers' uniforms. That's mentioned by at least two of the people in those recorded interviews. Also, the couple of people say that they thought that the Leicas were actually purchased or came independently to the Reid and Siegrist factory and didn't actually come back from Germany with the plans. Obviously, the Reid isn't an exact copy of the 3B because it's imperial measurements and not metric, which is what they had to do when they tried to decipher the plans. And as I understand it from people that John interviewed, they never had a full set of plans even if they wanted to make it everything metric. Also, the distance to the focal plane is a whisker different. Okay, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester were not presented with this camera at the British Industries Fair, mainly because there were no cameras ready. They had a couple of production models on display at the show, but they were, apart from the fact they were pretty much prototypes, they were unreliable, mainly because obviously the first thing that everybody that was looking at them or was interested in purchasing them did was pick them up, fire the shutter off, play with them, put them back on the stand. And it seems that there was a full-time repair guy behind the scenes on the Reid stand at the British Industries Fair who was constantly fettling them to make sure they were in working order, that when somebody came to look at them. So I guess there was maybe 2 or 3 cameras there, but they were pretty much prototypes and not finished working models. There was no, everybody knows the story that the camera was actually advertised for several years before it was available. So if the Royal Duke and Duchess did actually get a copy, were sent a camera, it would have been sent much later. I did actually send a letter to Clarence House asking if there was any evidence either way, but haven't had a reply, I'm afraid. Okay, military cameras didn't come in different boxes, mainly because they didn't come in any boxes at all. If you're making boxes for camera boxes for the military, the last thing you're going to do is to put them into a pretty box. You know, you're just going to make the cameras, fulfill the contract, send them off, get paid. So all military camera boxes are fake. They're not even reproductions because there never was an original. So they are fake. They do look quite pretty, but they are fakes. And when production ceased, not everything was sold for scrap, which we'll come to at sort of like later. Marston and Hurd's, which were the company that actually brought all of the scrap, were heavily involved in Leica servicing at the time, and they had access to quite a few Leica spare parts, as well as all the machinery and the tooling, which we'll see later. And A.W. Young was a retail shop in Leicester. Marston Hurd's are in Leicester, I think. A.W. Young was a retail shop in Leicester, and they were instrumental in selling, not only servicing the Leicas that their customers brought in, but selling some of the production right the way through till all that was left was just some lenses. We'll come to all that at a later date. Okay, so here's Major Reid, DFC, which he kept very quiet. And in World War I, he was returning to his aircraft carrier after a bombing raid on the Zeppelin sheds in Germany. And although his plane was undamaged, he saw, he was in a seaplane, so he noticed a downed pilot in the sea. So he landed his seaplane on the sea, got this pilot out, strapped into the wing of his plane, and then took off. But then, ironically, shortly after that, engine problems forced them both down again. So they pretty much sailed the seaplane for several hours, and then they were eventually captured by a German patrol boat. Both George and the other guy that he saved were German prisoners of war. George Reid managed to escape at least twice. There's some interesting stories that you can see on the internet about him. I think it probably deserves to be a book on him, just in his war exploits on his own. So here's the Stafford Cripps. He was Minister for Aircraft Production during the war, and then immediately after the war, he was President of the Board of Trade till 47, and then Chancellor of the Exchequer from 47 to 50. So there is a chance that he might have suggested something along the way, but I can't find any evidence, and certainly none of the recorded interviews mentioned his involvement. So I think we need to put a big question mark about that. Obviously, he knew of Reid and Siegrist, because during his time as Minister for Aircraft Production, he would have probably been in contact with them, or certainly somebody in his department would have been dishing out the contracts to make some of the instruments to go on the aircraft. Okay, so Oh, sorry. Gone back. So as I mentioned, there is a slight difference between the focusing on a Reid and on a Leica, which is allegedly an exact copy. And if you're using a standard or a wide angle lens, it's probably not noticeable, because once you stop down a couple of the aperture down a couple of stops, then it probably will automatically compensate for any changes. But here's a couple of versions of the 13.5 Dalmere lens. As you can see, both have got the C&P logo, Cook and Perkins logo on there, and they on the back they both have the WD contract number. But the one on the right also has the early version of the Reid and Segrist logo, and as you can see, although you can focus them both at infinity, the actual physical size of the lens and the way the engravings are, it's just slightly different to compensate for the difference in the distance to the film plane. This is the sort of thing that you would never notice unless you have these two lenses side by side. Okay, so as I mentioned, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, this is the picture which came to light only just pretty much immediately before I did this talk at the AGM, where an American newspaper archive had digitized all their photographs and all their stories. And here is a photograph of them actually touring the British Industries Fair. It's obviously really bad quality. It's I don't know how big it was, but it looks like it's been scanned or photocopied or something and then digitized. But you can see there's Major Reid on the right, and the Duke and Duchess there. He's got a Reid in his hand, but we know for a fact that it wasn't presented to them at that fair. If they had one at all, it was sent on at a later date. So this was obviously done as a photo opportunity, and I think that's how the story has sort of morphed into being presented with, as opposed to here we are showing it to them. Okay, so onto the cameras. So the original ones is what we've called, along with Leica, is the zero or the null series cameras, and this is camera number A1001, which was sold in 2016 by an auction company in America, where it sold for $2,400 plus the buyer's premium. So I think that was, for such an important camera, I think that was quite a bargain. As you can see from the picture in at the top, you can just see the old style Reid and Segrist logo, which I have to say I think I prefer to the one which we all know now, which is pretty much says Reid, but in what we know as the Leica script. So as you can see, it's quite a nice camera, and I think it was a bit of a bargain at that price. So this is a top view of that camera, and excuse me, as you can see, it says Reid and Segrist London now, as opposed to Leicester or Leicestershire. Now it's not clear whether that London refers to their Hampstead office, which they were in for a short amount of time, Northwest 3 part of North London, or whether more likely it was their New Malden in Surrey address. But that's one of the very few times you're going to see Reid and Segrist London, as opposed to the Leicester designations. Okay, so this is a Reid prototype, which is serial number A2, as you can see down there in the bottom right. So this was sold at Bonham's in Knowle in 2009, which was $2,100, including their premium. Some auction companies announced their results including or excluding premium. So I've tried to make it clear what it was in 2009. Again, that was quite a reasonable amount of money in 2009, but for what was a prototype camera, then again, I think it was a sensible price. Where it is now, I wish I knew. And this is another prototype, it's a prototype of the Reid 3, which has a completely blank top plate. It's got the Taylor Hobson 2-inch f2 lens, but it's unengraved. There's no markings around the rim. And this was sold by Christie's in 2002 for $2,350. So again, historically a very important camera, and without obviously without any designate, without any serial numbers or anything, we're not exactly sure where it fits into the history of things. But I would imagine it was relatively early on in their production. Christie's called it a prototype, and obviously back then it was Michael Pritchard, and he knows what he was talking about. So it depends where it was, who consigned it and what the story was behind it, which is sometimes what you don't get to know with things, interesting things like this that come to auction. Okay, this is an unsynchronized version of the Reid 3, which came from Bob White's collection, which I was privileged enough to handle a few years ago. And as you can see, this is this is a finished camera, but it doesn't have any flash synchronization. Flash sync has always been a bit of a bugbear with Leicas as well, I guess. And as we'll see a bit later on, they did make several attempts to address this problem, some of which were slightly more successful than others, but I don't think there was really a really elegant answer to it, which I guess is why a lot of Leicas will have a flash sync added either to the back of the camera or in the middle of the top plate. Okay, this is from John Vincent's collection now. This here, which is if you see a picture of a camera and it's still got the little tag attached to it, I decided to leave those on when we auctioned the collection, because I think that is part of that camera's provenance, that it came from John's collection, and that's his handwritten notes and references that go with it. As you can see, not only is this military camera with its number on the back, it's got its wide arrow markings. There are a couple of different numbers depending on what the contract was, I guess. But also this one very nicely has the same contract number and the wide arrow mark on the back of the camera case. So that's another reason why I say that there were no boxes for military cameras, because if you've got a camera and a camera case that's going to give it protection, then the first thing that's going to happen is the box the camera's in is going to get thrown away. So I'm pretty sure that they never made a box for the military cameras. Okay, now this is a bit of an anomaly which some people are aware of, and this again came through Aston's when I was there, and it's been called a periscope model. I'm not convinced myself. One person suggested it's for use with a rangefinder. Somebody else thought because it was called the periscope version, it was designed to be attached to the periscope of a submarine, so you could take photographs through the periscope. I guess it could be the answer, but if that is why, then as you can see from the picture on the right, it's got a whacking great hole in the back of the camera. It's got a screw mount which has got like the equivalent of a lens cap, as you can see on the picture on the left. And this, if it was for taking a picture through a periscope, the distance between the image in the periscope and the film plane wouldn't vary. So I don't understand why it wasn't just preset and then the camera just screwed into the periscope and then taken off afterwards. This is a periscope version. So this is a Reid 1, which has been converted to reflex viewing. It's got the military markings on the back. It's got a Cook and Perkins Leica screw mount lens, and this was sold at Christie's in 2002. Sorry about the quality of the picture. Some of this was copied off the internet, so it's not particularly good quality. But as you can see, there's been looking at the quality, the difference in the quality of the machining. it looks to me that to the left of the viewfinder as we look at it, the equivalent of a right angle eyepiece has been fitted at a later date, possibly with an eyepiece correction knurled ring at the top there, and then presumably a drop-down periscope, or maybe even a permanently attached periscope version, just like in the core field Periflex. And here's a couple of other versions. Now these were in John's research notes with nothing. There was just 2 colour photographs. There was nothing else. No other information with them. There's no reference to them that I can find in any of his research. Obviously, can't see the number on the on either camera, the serial number, because they've been obliterated by this attachment. The one on at the top left looks to me like that's a plunger. I mean, it might even be the camera that we saw previously, which was sold at Christie's. So if it is the same camera, then you would obviously push that plunger down, which would drop the little periscope right angle thing in front of the lens, so that you could focus and then compose your photo and then release it, so that there was no interruption to the light path. The one on the right, we can actually see the little right angle periscope there that's just creeping down into the lens space there. Let's say it's possible that is, because some other mention, it's possible that the one on the right is serial number 1746, but that's all the information that we know about those so far. If anybody else knows anything, I'd be more than happy to hear their ideas. Okay, so this is Reid 1A, which is pretty much a Reid without any viewfinders. So this is designed for use with a supplementary viewfinder and rangefinder or something like that to fit in the top. Very much like the Leica, although I guess this is going to be for scientific or industrial use, as opposed to actually just taking pictures. Okay, this is a fairly rare example of a Reid 2, which looks pretty much like all the rest of the range, except there's no slow speed. So it's got the flash sync, but there's no slow speed dial there. Really difficult to find a Reid 2, especially as I guess that at some stage you might well have been able to have something, have the slow speeds added. I don't know if that was technically feasible, but difficult to find, and even more difficult to keep a track of the serial numbers of these, because somebody just records it as a serial number, not necessarily which particular model it relates to. Okay, it's my favorite camera in the entire Vincent collection. This is a Reid prototype X4. Now, before you even ask, we've seen X2. I have no idea if there was or where there was an X3. So that's preempted some questions for later. So this is the Reid number X4. And had it have been developed and launched earlier than it was, this could well have been a saviour of the Reid, certainly in the short term, of the Reid camera production. Probably it was already too late. We don't have a date for this, but I'm guessing that we're into the 50s. Well, we're into the late 50s, possibly even early 60s, by which time SLRs are starting to come onto the market. So rangefinders for general purpose use for dedicated enthusiasts and amateurs were taking a little bit of a backseat. So I'm not sure, this is actually a video, and I'm not sure whether you're actually going to be able to see this video. So I'll set it playing. So I'm not sure if you can manage to see that video, if it actually played. Oh yeah, David's giving the thumbs up. Oh, it's gone again, sorry. So yeah, so that was really fascinating. So here's some close-up pictures of the thing. As you can see, particularly in the top right there, very, very intricate machining required, because obviously they're using production production parts, and they're making them do something that they weren't really designed to do. The hinge is really nice, really nice and smooth to open and close. And as you can see there, the little dovetail, for want of a better description, the way it all fits in together, really nice. As I say, whether it was too little, too late to save the company, I don't know, but it was certainly a real absolute landmark item in John's collection. Oh, didn't tell. I think we ended up. It didn't actually sell at the auction while it was live, but we had before we all went home, we had a phone call from somebody who had tried to bid on it, but it didn't quite make the reserve. So after the event, it sold for I think it was £4,300 plus commission. So it's going to be about five and a bit thousand. So yeah, and interestingly, the guy who bought it isn't a collector, he's a user. He said, I've got a couple of Reids that I use to take pictures with, and now I'm going to be using this one. So hopefully John's looking down on us, and so are the people from Reid and Segrist, and they'd be happy to know that their camera is at least getting a lot of use by one very happy customer. Okay, we've touched briefly on numbers. There was no official, well, if there was an official record of the production numbers of each model, then it doesn't exist anymore. So John, in collaboration with somebody else, actually published a list of serial numbers in Photographical World a good few years ago, when he had well over 200 serial numbers recorded and which models they relate to. Since then, I've been taken up the flame, and we now have, this is up until yesterday, we now have 476 Reid serial numbers recorded. And this is my best guess on how they all fit together. So as you can see there, I think it probably unlikely that they started at 1 or started at 1,000 or 1,001 or whatever, and then went sequentially through every number with a different set of numbers relating to each model. So pretty much this is what I've just pieced together from the serial numbers I've managed to find from what we've got from John, and some of it is a guess because not everybody, as I said before, has actually recorded the precise model that they relate to. So we've got 361 Reid ones. There's a few of the high and low levels of their serial numbers. 1A is even trickier to think. So far, I've only got 4 confirmed serial numbers of a 1A. The Reid 2, we've got 571. Actually, these figures are going to be very slightly out of date because they won't all add up to 476 if you're keeping a track of me as we go. So again, you can see there's some big blocks of numbers there, you know, within a sensible range, and then every now and again you get what I call like an orphan number, when maybe it's been copied down wrong, or somebody's I've copied it down wrong or something. So that seems to be a bit of an anomaly, that 2129 there. Reid 3s, obviously lots more of those around. So, and again, quite a lot of them fall into some really nice, neat ranges of numbers. So we've got nearly 2,000 of those now with all the current updates. So my best guess, back of a fag packet addition and finger in the wind estimate, is that a total across all models is probably somewhere around about 3,000. I think that's probably a bit more than other people's guesses that have been up to now, but we can back that up with some reasonably accurate information. So for the fact that John had 13 at one time, and goodness knows how many over the course of his collecting, he had quite a reasonable percentage of the output. Okay, as I mentioned that I think earlier on that John's collection included quite a lot of Taylor Hobson items. He got right back as far as the Bell and Howell history up the top there that were involved, particularly with the photon. He'd got factory tools, just an amazing amount of spare parts. This is just a small part of it, which when I first got everything back and relayed it, we just couldn't believe some of the stuff that was there. Okay, boxes. So here's your fake Reid box, top left. So that is a fake because there was never a proper Reid box like that. The one on the bottom, the one on the right hand side is a proper Reid box. And again, that you probably can't see it too well on that picture, but that's actually a small, like a little pressed metal medallion, I guess, for want of a better word, that's mounted on the top. It's not just a print on that; it's a proper three-dimensional piece. It's a really nice quality box. I really wanted one of those for my own collection, but unfortunately, I was outbid as I was on most of the stuff in John's collection because we had such wide range interest in the sale that I just couldn't keep up with some of the prices. Okay, this is the inside of the box with the fake and the genuine boxes. As you can see, the genuine one's relatively simple on the inside. The fake one is, somebody's had as many bells and whistles as they can. And we know that these fakes were made by Gordon Trepwinard, who was involved with either A.W. Young's or the others at some stage. He was a talented photographer and a model maker, and he designed and had these made. And if there was a documentary on TV a year or so back called The First Film by David Wilkinson, which is when they decided that it wasn't the French that invented cine film after all, it was us, and that the first proper moving cine film was taking in Leeds, and David Wilkinson produced this film, and Gordon Trepwinard actually made the replicas of the cameras which were used in that film to prove that they were actually working and not just models which was like a work in progress or prototypes. If you get a chance to see that, The First Film, David Wilkinson, very interesting film. Okay, so back to Reid. Here's a couple of things which I did actually manage to get from John's sale. And just to preempt any questions, whenever I buy anything at one of the auctions that I run, I do not get any preferential treatment. I have to pay all the fees, all the commissions, all the others, everything else that everybody else does. So it's a level playing field. The one at the bottom would appear to be a blank that hasn't been engraved. These are really almost impossible to find. Unfortunately, at the last Photographica, which is like 3 years ago now, one of the guys who knows of my interest in Reid, who collects Reid stuff himself, came up to me with a massive, great big smile on his face and showed me one of these, to which I said, please don't tell me you just brought that in somebody's rummage box for a couple of pounds. His smile got even bigger and he went away without saying anything. So they are out there, but they're incredibly difficult to find. These are even more difficult to find. These are the blanks and a prototype lens cap, which I'm guessing the one at the top there, it says repairs. This is one that was put onto a camera when it came in for repair to protect the lens. The brass former, I guess, on the left is probably what they used to stamp out the originals. And then what I think is a very nice, simple lens cap at the bottom is a prototype that they decided that they weren't going to use after all, because it morphed into the one at the bottom here, which we see. And it's the only, I think the reason they put that on is because because Reid made the camera and Taylor Hobson made the lens. So I guess they thought it was more politically correct to include both companies' names on the lens cap rather than just Reid. And there again, there's John's handwritten notes, which is sometimes like his. You can see his thought his thought processes as he's writing these things out. The one at the top right, we still don't know what that's for because it doesn't fit the lens, doesn't fit any other Taylor Hobson lens cap lens that we found so far, or even that John had found, and he should know. So unique collection there. Not as unique as these. I can see one person's just about to throw his hands up in horror, if not two of them. So this is a pair of incredibly rare Reid lens hoods. From some of the notes that John had made, it seems that at one stage, Reid and Siegrist were thinking of producing a range of filters, branded filters to go on the camera, and that they had thought of using the Photax filter system, which were quite popular for Leica users that didn't want to fork out for an official Leica one. And it's quite possible that this is a Photax lens hood, which has then been engraved in the factory. But I guess these are going to be relatively small value items, and to have them hand engraved, which is what they would have done then, and yet another item of stock to have in your inventory, things to send out to the camera dealers and everything. I guess it was probably just thought that it wasn't worthwhile producing them in-house when there was a handy alternative on the secondary market. These sold for an absolutely incredible £1,800 plus buyer's premium for the pair. Just unheard of. Okay, this is a very interesting. This is an addition to my original talk. This is one of the storage boxes which came out of the Reid and Siegrist factory. You'll notice a picture, an enlargement at the bottom of the plate that's on the front of the case, and that's pretty much exactly the same plate that they used on their enlargers, which we'll see later on. So yeah, very nice wooden storage case. Oh, you want to know what was inside? Well, what was inside was 24 Taylor Hobson 2-inch lenses. I'm just picturing that in my mind again, because about 20 years ago, I saw this case full of lenses, and as I revealed for the first time in the original talk, these were at one stage owned by Werner Schmidt, from somebody you might remember, Old Timer Cameras, who produced, who made their living out of photocopies of instruction books for just about any photographic item you can think of. At one stage, I was, for about a year, I was working for a subdivision of Old Timer Cameras, nothing to do with cameras, but I saw this lens in, this box of lenses in Werner's house, along with a couple of other very interesting items not related to Reid, because Werner Schmidt was actually originally a partner in, not A.W. Young, the other one whose name's escaped me at the moment, and he was eventually bought out by his partner. And in quite a few of John's notes, the people either John has mentioned or the people he's interviewed have mentioned a German, and Werner had, as suggested, was German. He had a very pronounced German accent, and I can confidently say now that that he was the person who was involved in the in originally buying the what was thought originally to be the bankrupt stock, and what they did carry on using it at a later date. So that's a pretty amazing piece of kit. As I mentioned, the flash has always been a problem with Reid's, and this is quite an interesting hand typed note, which came via Dave Todd, which is about the various ways of producing of getting your read to synchronize with flash. It always seemed to be a bit of a Heath Robinson affair. You had to plug a non-standard plug into the non-standard sockets on the cameras. They did try and rectify that at a later date, but it was really a bit of an unwieldy system for synchronizing flash. But behind the scenes, they were working on this. This was just a little plastic bag full of bits and pieces that came from John's collection. And it took me a while to work it all out. Obviously, there's a non-standard, right at the top there is the non-standard flash connection, which has a different connection on the back. There's all sorts of gizmos and bits and pieces there, plus an adapted base plate and a bit that slides into it. So it did take me a while to work out all this actually hangs together. But this is what it would have looked like. So this has actually been photoshopped, because you can't physically put that synchronized base plate onto a standard camera, because the flash connection on the inside fouls on one of the bits inside the camera. So all I've had to do is sort of photograph it, mock it up in Photoshop. So that's how it would have looked. But they were also working on this. In 1952, they filed a patent for the improvements to relating to firing a flash on a camera. This is way too technical for my simple brain, I'm afraid. So it just shows that they knew it was a problem. They'd been working on it in several ways, and they'd managed to patent at least one of those ways. So this is maybe something for further investigation if someone with more technical knowledge than I can work out how all those things sort of hang together. Leaflets and instruction books, some really difficult to find. The top one, which is a trifold leaflet, which features the Reid 1, the 1A, the 2 and the 3, I think is the only time that all 4 models were advertised together. And also there's, I think we'll see that one of those is actually one of the prototype cameras. So they were obviously producing the paperwork as they went along. Some of the other ones down the bottom, you may have seen them out and about before. The blue one on the left is very rare, and that actually features the A1 prototype. The yellow one is also rare, and that features a camera which has got no serial number, and is possibly the camera that's sold in Christie's in 2002. So here's your instructions for the close focusing attachment, which we'll see in a minute. And on the right, you'll see again a typed and duplicated what they've called their temporary instruction book. This one shows us the lens number and the camera serial number, and is nicely dated the 20th of the 12th, 1952. So I like to imagine that this was somebody who'd either brought themselves a Christmas present or were going to give a nice Christmas present for somebody, bearing in mind the date. And then at the bottom, there's 2 standard instruction books, which again are not all that easy to find and starting to command quite high prices. So there's a close-up of the typewritten and duplicated book. I've only ever handled the one that was in John's collection and seen one other. So while we're on the subject of instruction books and leaflets and things, so here are the actual printing blocks which we use for advertising. One on the front of the instruction book and the other one is the printing plate for the Reid and Seacrest adverts in the British Journal, almanacs, and probably in other places. And what I've done down in the bottom is to flip it and invert the photographs in Photoshop, so you can see that's how they would appear when they're in print.